Hi, and welcome back to another one of our online lectures here in World History. We're going to bring our unit on imperialism to independence to a close today by looking at 4 stories of consequences of imperialism. Now, we've already looked at the effects of imperialism. We saw how British rule in India had both positive and negative effects, and by no stretch of the imagination are any of those minor. Same thing goes for Africa. I mean, some major effects there. But we're going to see how imperialism really caused 4 major events to occur that are very significant in history. So this is actually going to be kind of a 4-part lecture, really 4 different stories all about consequences of imperialism. So to answer and understand those 4 stories, we've got 3 questions that we're going to use to put this together. The first thing we're going to talk about is World War I and how imperialism kind of led up to that. So summarize the role imperialism played in Europe prior to World War I. The second thing we're going to look at are 2 different events in Africa that resulted in the death of a lot of people. We're going to look at the events in Rwanda and in Darfur. So we're taking 2 events and we're putting it into one question. It says compare and contrast the events that occurred in Rwanda in 1994 and the events that occurred in Darfur in the early 2000s. And our last thing we're going to look at is really going to be the independence movement led by Gandhi in India. So our last question says, describe who Mahatma Gandhi was and what actions he took in India. So these are the 4 stories we're going to look at. Basically, I just went through them. The first one is Unrest in the Balkans, which leads to the start of World War I. Second story we're going to tell is the genocide in Rwanda. Third story is the genocide in Darfur. And the last story is Gandhi in the independence movement in India. So that is what we're going to cover with consequences of imperialism. So let's start with looking at sort of an overview. Imperialism often makes one group or groups subjects of another group. And when that happens, naturally you get conflict out of it. So there's no doubt we've seen that, and we will see that throughout this particular lecture. Of course, this results in racism, economic disparities, and of course hatred. Those are things that certainly, when you look at economic disparities, when one group is hungry, another group is affluent, that can lead to revolutions, it can lead to warfare, it can lead to all sorts of conflict. And a lot of that is all stemmed by racism. Eventually, that hatred caused reactions as seen as in Rwanda, Darfur, India, and the Balkans region of Europe. So again, those are our 4 segments, our 4 stories that we're going to look at built in within this lecture. So let's start with segment number 1, Unrest in the Balkans. What we want to really establish here is how imperialism, among other things, helped cause World War I. There's no doubt imperialism is not the only piece, but it certainly matters in this story. So this is the Balkan region of Europe. It's really southeastern Europe, if you want to look at that on a more globalized map. But we're going to be looking at certainly Serbia, Austria-Hungary. We're going to mention a couple of these other countries with Romania, Bulgaria as part of this story. So, unrest in the Balkans. Well, rivalries in Europe caused many nations to compete with one another, leading to a rise in nationalism. And all these things are going to be intertwined. We can't look at this purely from an imperialistic standpoint, because nationalism is going to matter, militarism is going to matter, a lot of other pieces are going to matter in this story. But as more and more of these European countries wanted to find markets and wanted to make money and started feeling really prideful of who they were, that's going to really increase nationalism. So, those of you familiar with World War I know many secret alliances were formed between countries in case of armed conflict. And I'm not going to go into all the detail of the 2 different alliances with the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente, but this image here gives you kind of an idea of who was allied with whom. Russia, Britain, France, Italy, Austria-Hungary, Germany. Italy eventually switches sides and the U.S. joins. So, I mean, that's definitely a quick look at this. And you'll study that a little bit more closely, or should have studied that a little bit more closely in American history in 10th grade. But I mentioned this piece. The competition for materials and markets grew, and territorial disputes became more intense. After all, this is what we looked at with the Berlin Conference. The Europeans knew that they were going to compete with one another in Africa, and so they had proactively met and decided how they were going to split up that continent so that they could avoid war, because there was diamonds, there was gold, there's lots of materials there that they wanted. And when that happens, you can create disputes pretty quickly. So the Berlin Conference was meant to keep European countries from going to war over Africa, but imperialism and militarism back home were causing tensions to rise. So built within this, we have a lot of things going on. We've got the alliance system, we've got nationalism, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the imperialistic piece here on the next slide. So understand, World War I was not only caused by imperialism, but it certainly imperialism was certainly one of the important precursors to war. The Balkan region of Europe in the southeast saw many groups struggling to free themselves from the declining Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire is a big Islamic empire that right around World War I kind of dismantles and falls apart. And a lot of these countries that had once been controlled by the Ottoman Empire really wanted their own sovereignty. They wanted their own control. And of course, that's nationalism. Nationalism was growing in these countries. So we're talking about Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania, and among many other ethnic groups who wanted their own independence. So if you've been controlled by one group for a long time, that group doesn't represent you. Naturally, you want somebody like yourself to rule you. People like to be ruled by their own people, and that's nationalism. Well, Austria-Hungary opposed Serbia's attempts at a united Slavic people. Austria-Hungary had been creating an empire in Europe. That's imperialism. When they take over and they start dominating another group politically, like is going on here, that is imperialism. So naturally, the Slavic people are not going to be very happy with Austria-Hungary. So in 1908, Austria annexed or took over Bosnia and Herzegovina with large Slavic populations and threatened to crush any Serbian effort to undermine its authority. So they're taking over land. That's what annexing means. And they're enforcing their laws and their ideas on these countries. So again, if we look at our definition of imperialism, when a dominant country seeks to take over another country and dominate them politically, socially, and economically, that's exactly what's going on here with Austria. So this is absolutely a consequence of imperialism. So here's kind of what we're talking about. Here's 1908. You've got Austria-Hungary, their empire here. Down here you've got Bosnia, Herzegovina. It was annexed by Austria, and here's little Serbia right in the middle. Serbia wants their own country. They want their own land. They want to rule themselves. But Austria-Hungary is not really wanting any of this to happen in this part of the world. So what ends up happening here is, well, you get the spark that starts World War I. This man here, Gavrilo Princip, decides, he's a Serbian nationalist, that he is going to assassinate the heir to the throne in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and that is Franz Ferdinand. So you've got nationalism, you've got militarism, you've got alliances, and of course you've got imperialism, all as underlying causes of World War I. But this event, you can see Princip here in this picture, leaning in to shoot the Archduke and his wife. That became the spark necessary to start World War I. So Gavrilo Princip, 19-year-old Serbian, decided to shoot Austria-Hungary's heir to their throne, whose name was the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and he also shot his wife at point-blank range while they were on a visit to Sarajevo on June 28, 1914. Normally, shooting and killing one person, as important as Franz Ferdinand was, would not be considered an act of war, because Gavrilo Princip did not represent all of Serbia. He did not represent the government. So, it'd be as if I went and shot the leader of Canada today. Canada's not going to declare war on the entire country of America just because of my actions. But the reason it happened here is because, like we saw in the previous slide, we had all these alliances in place, these countries that supported one another. You had nationalism, pride played a big role of this, and of course imperialism as well. So Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, and the alliance system brought all of Europe into war by August 1914. World War I had begun. So imperialism definitely played a big role. If Austria-Hungary had not exerted its control over Bosnia and over Serbia and tried to force them to not uniting or not having their own Slavic lands, it's very possible that World War I might not have begun. So imperialism played a very big role. Okay, let's wrap up the first part of our four-part lecture here on consequences of imperialism by just looking at question number one, because we just got done talking about really how World War I started. Certainly we looked at nationalism and militarism, and there are a lot of things going on that led to World War I, but imperialism caused it as well. So our first question says, summarize the role imperialism played in Europe prior to World War I. Well, this is where we have to recognize that the Austro-Hungarian Empire was really preventing a lot of people from having the autonomy and rights that they always wanted. And specifically that affected Serbia. There's a lot of Serbians who wanted a united Serbian country, and Austria-Hungary was saying no, they couldn't do that. Austria-Hungary was exerting its political power over other people, and that is a form of imperialism when you are really using your power to control another country. And so that led to Gavrilo Princip, a Serbian nationalist who decided he was going to gun down the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which ultimately was the spark that led to the war beginning. Like I said, we can't discount all the other pieces. Fanatical leaders, nationalism, militarism. I mean, we have lots of causes of World War I, but imperialism definitely played a role. So that should help us answer that question. Next time around, we're going to come on the scene and we're going to see Rwanda and Darfur, two very, very tragic situations that occurred in Africa. So we'll come back to question number 2 and 3 later on. So that'll do it for us here. Hope you learned something. We'll see you next time.